Hamas. Let's discuss this further with Mohamad Elmasry. He's a media studies professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. You've been listening in to the session, to the emergency meeting with me. And I could see when Robert Wood, the deputy US envoy to the United Nations, started speaking, I could see that you were quite upset watching him and listening to what he had to say. So talk us through the highlights of the various speakers, and particularly the United States. So what did you think of what he had to say? I mean, no surprise there, really.
Right, and if anything, it was just me expressing a lack of surprise. It was out of the U.S. playbook. I mean, he used all of the familiar sort of tropes. He located the problem with Hamas and Hezbollah. He completely let Israel off the hook. It was extremely one-sided. He said the attacks by Hamas and Hezbollah on Israel were completely unprovoked. He ignored all of the context. He ignored the worse than apartheid conditions in the West Bank. He ignored the occupation. He ignored the siege on Gaza, or the blockade on Gaza, which is a crime against humanity. I could go on and on and on, but he ignored all of that. Of course, he called Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists. And so basically what I would say is that anyone who was expecting kind of a different tone from the United States was in for kind of a rude awakening. It was really more of the same. He did not mention Israel's aggression in Gaza. He did not speak to the illegality of what Israel has done in Lebanon this week. I thought it was interesting that multiple speakers did speak to that. We heard that the distinction, the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, which are bedrocks of international humanitarian law, were ignored by Israel. Obviously, if you're exploding pagers in public spaces at 2:30 in the afternoon, it's well known that civilians are going to be killed and maimed.
And you're right. A number of countries, including the United Kingdom, France, made that point. But when it came to the United States, again, they pointed the finger at Hezbollah for that. They said what is always Israel's defense, that Hezbollah is hiding behind civilians.
Right, as if the Hezbollah members are supposed to lock themselves away in some hidden corner of the earth and not go to grocery stores. I think we should underscore that they were not on the front lines. They were not fighters. They were not fighting, and some of them were not even fighters. So even that is a violation of international humanitarian law. You cannot just target someone who is a member of the military when they're at the grocery store with their children, for instance, right? And certainly not with an exploding pager or walkie-talkie. It's interesting that the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, explicitly prohibits this, right? So you have, on the one hand, the U.S. government prohibiting this. On the other hand, you have Robert Wood and other representatives this week for the U.S. almost cheerleading Israel for their sophisticated intelligence and so on and so forth. I thought it was interesting that multiple countries, including China and Algeria, called on countries with influence over Israel. And this is a clear reference to the United States. Countries with influence over Israel to finally exercise that influence to put a stop to this. One of the things that Robert Wood did not mention is that there were multiple serious ceasefire resolutions proposed, which the United States vetoed in the early months of this war. He did not mention that, of course, because that does not fit the U.S. Israel narrative, right? Yeah. Messaging. So certainly it was interesting to listen to, but it was nothing surprising.
Mohamad, one more thing to pick up with, which I noticed, a number of the UN ambassadors talking about the implementation of Resolution 1701. Give us a bit of context there. Why is that important?
Yeah, so 1701 is the resolution that would basically end the conflict between Lebanon and Israel. This was proposed after the 2006 war, right? So it calls on both parties to end hostilities, right? But again, the issue here is that the United States because, and I believe it was Rami Khouri who was mentioning earlier, the problem here is with the basic structure of the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council, that you have these permanent members, the U.S. being one of them, of the Security Council that have veto power. And so if there's anything that they don't like that contradicts their foreign policy objectives or one of the objectives of their allies, like Israel, then they can veto. So sadly, I don't think that we are any closer to a ceasefire in Gaza or a resolution to this burgeoning, widening conflict between Hezbollah and Israel.
So what do you think meetings like this achieve? I mean, do they at least highlight, the growing tide of international opinion that is going against Israel, at least over the course of the last year? We've seen that change, haven't we?
We have seen it. Certainly, global public opinion, particularly if you look at the global South countries, right, and they are the majority. Certainly, there is a tide working against Israel. There are
that matters, right? Even
it does
if resolutions
matter.
are not passed.
It does matter. But one of the problems with a meeting like this is because it highlights the Security Council, and because you have, France and you have the United States and the United Kingdom, and all of them were featured speakers here. So you still end up with a very you kind of get mixed messages. I don't think that this is an accurate reflection of global public opinion or global support or lack thereof for Israel. I think over the long term, Israel is going to have a lot of difficulty, particularly as these young people in Western Europe and in North America become decision makers. They are the ones in those countries who are most likely to oppose Israeli policies.
Rami, we're just closely approaching the top of the hour. I just want to squeeze in one more question, if I can. It's interesting, we're talking about the narrative that continues to come from the United States. On the one hand, they talk about how they are trying to achieve a ceasefire, about what was going on in Lebanon and his response to what was happening. He made the point, we are continuing to try to do, and as we have from the beginning, to make sure that both people in northern Israel as well as southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes. I thought that was really interesting way to frame his response. Given everything that's happened in Lebanon, the fact that he was echoing Israel's war goal,
right,
that it's made a point in the last couple of days to add to its war goals,
right,
returning people back home to northern Israel. Why would he put it like that if he's trying to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East?
Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense. In fact, what Israel said the other day, that they're going to escalate and therefore, through that effort, that escalation effort, bring people back home to their homes in the north, that actually makes no sense. More war is more likely to lead to more displacement, not Israelis who have already been displaced returning home. And so it's really difficult to make sense of that, just like it's difficult to make sense of the U.S. talking about a ceasefire, but then vetoing ceasefire resolutions or calling on parties to restrain themselves and follow the law, but then funding Israel to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. So there's contradictory messaging, and I think the lesson here is that we have to take everything that the U.S. and other states say with a grain of salt.
Okay, good to talk to you. Mohamad Elmasry, Media Studies Professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank
Thanks.
you.